Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 63 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by a two-time guest now, Khobi Price of the Southern California News Group, a fellow beat writer with me on the road. And we are both here in Memphis, nice and rainy, stormy Memphis for Election Day. Hope all of you got out and voted. Khobi, how you doing, my man?
What's up? What's up? What's up? I love the Jovan Buha. Buha. It's such an energizer every time. I love it. I'm good, man. How you feeling?
Gets the people going. I'm good,
people
man.
Going.
I was not expecting this weather, so just getting off of the plane and it being so it's like some serious rating, and I was just not ready for that. But I'm staying nice and warm and ready to talk some Lakers basketball. So the big thing for the Lakers over the last 24 hours has been Anthony Davis and his health status. Late in the 115-103 loss to the Pistons, he goes down at about the 4:46 mark after scoring a basket inside, plants his foot, his left foot, and lands awkwardly. From that point on, Lakers have to call timeout 20 seconds later. He crumples to the floor, has to be helped up by D'Lo and Lakers trainer John Ishop. He goes to the stanchion and is stretching it out, and ends up gingerly walking back to the huddle, plays the rest of the game, but clearly is hampered, is hobbled, he's limping, and he's just not himself, despite actually scoring an alley-oop lay-in, which I thought was kind of wild given his physical state. But we speak with AD after the game. He says he's not sure if he's going to miss any time. He's not sure as to the severity of it. He's got to go through testing and talk with the medical staff. LeBron kind of shuts down a question about what's the impact of AD missing time potentially, and say like it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know what that is going to look like, and I think it would look pretty bad if AD was to miss some extended time. But today, Lakers announced their injury report for tomorrow. AD is listed as questionable with a left heel contusion, which in theory is positive news because he's not been ruled out, and a contusion is simply a bruise, and doesn't, not to minimize it, it can be very painful and it can cause you to miss time, but it's not like necessarily a structural thing of like a broken foot or torn tendons or whatever. That said, the Lakers over the last couple of years have had several players with knee contusions, Kendrick Nunn, Gabe Vincent, and those have tended to linger. So the word contusion is a bit of a trigger word for the fan base. But Khobi, with the news now that AD is questionable, he's not been ruled out yet, seems to potentially be not as serious as the worst case scenario. What's your reaction to the AD update?
Yeah, I mean, with him being questionable, that means what? It's a 50-50 chance that he plays. So, I mean, that's just positive news just because coming out of yesterday's game, we weren't really sure. Just like, what was the state? He's talking about that this foot injury has been lingering since the summer. So it was hard to know, like, how serious is this? Is it something that can he play through? Is he gonna have to be on the mend for a little bit? So it seems like you said, it's positive news that he's questionable. There's a chance he's gonna play. Obviously, in about 24-ish hours or maybe like 23 hours, we'll have an official word about whether he actually does play. But the fact that he's just not completely ruled out for tomorrow, and there's, like I said, a 50-50 chance, that's positive news to me, and probably for the Lakers as well, especially because Anthony Davis has been hands down, no question, their undisputed best player. And especially on this trip, that's been definitely the case, and they need him. If they're going to try to not just beat Memphis, but if they're going to just try to stay competitive during it's obviously the early part of the season, but as we see in the Western Conference every single year, every game counts. A lot of times in the standings, 4 through 8 or 5 through 9, whatever, can be separated by a matter of 2, 3, 4, 5 games. Every game counts, and they need Anthony Davis just on the floor at his best, you'll obviously you want him at his best, but just on the floor, period. I mean, look, this dude obviously he's going through with his foot, and he still had what 37, and it's
It's crazy.
something crazy. Like, and clearly, like you say, he's saying that he's been dealing with this since the summer. Yet he's still leading the league in scoring. At least the last time I checked. Actually, there are no games today,
Yeah.
so that's still going to be the case at over 32 points per game. So yeah, this dude. This guy, they need him in the worst way, especially with the way that some of the other players are playing. They need him on the floor, just on the floor. Period. The percentage he's at seems to not even matter at this point in terms of
I
his
mean,
impact.
yeah, you could argue it's like the way half this group is playing right now. It's been really rough recently. Another notable update is Christian Koloko is not on the injury report, and according to the LA Times, Dan Wojcicki, he is going to be with the team in Memphis and available. So that, we had not heard anything on Christian since he had been cleared to resume, and we hadn't been heard if he was going to play with South Bay with the opener this upcoming Saturday, and just kind of how he had been progressing. So this was, I think, an encouraging piece of news. I do wonder, what are realistic expectations for a guy who hasn't played in a while and is coming off such a serious thing that certainly I'm sure on some level affected his conditioning, and just guys tend to need some time to ramp up. So, but I think it's welcome news for the Lakers, especially if Anthony Davis, maybe he misses Wednesday's game, maybe it keeps him out a couple games, and if AD doesn't play, like the Lakers are down to Jackson Hayes and then Rui Hachimura or LeBron James as a small ball backup five, and that is just not going to get it done with the level of defense that they've been playing recently. They're just going to have to outscore people, which we've seen from this group. They can do that, and D'Lo could get hot. Austin could get hot. LeBron can obviously carry the offense when needed, but I think that the defensive hit and just not having the bodies in the front court, with Vando still out, Christian Wood still out. We're probably due for an update on him pretty soon here. So the Christian Koloko news, I think, what was another positive on this injury report. If he's able to go tomorrow or at some point this week, what do you think of him and his potential impact within the rotation?
Yeah, I remember asking around the time that he got sent to South Bay to work on his condition. I asked, or was trying to figure out like what does his excuse me, his return to play look like, and I was told it's more so just a matter of conditioning, since he's been, I think it's been 18 months, 19 months since he last played an NBA
Yeah.
game, something
Oh,
like that. I
yeah.
mean, to the end of the
It's
2022
a while.
2023 season. So
It's a
I
long
was just
time.
told, yeah. So it was just a matter of conditioning, which that was around the Cleveland game. So that was the second game of the trip. That's not that long ago. So I would imagine he's been working on this on his own. Then he gets cleared by the panel, with the league's panel, and then he's able to ramp it up even more with South Bay. So I mean, just from a tool standpoint, he seems like a guy that can protect the rim. Has the length, has the size, good motor, more defensive oriented at this point. Well, at least from the last time. And again, it's also been over a year and a half since we last saw him play. We actually don't. I mean, you can make a lot of progress with certain things in a year and a half. So, but from my last memory of him, more defensive oriented player, more defensive oriented big, length, size, mobile, athletic. So, from that standpoint, that's something that, with or without AD, that I think they would benefit from. The Lakers would benefit from, but I just don't know. Long term, he obviously is on a two-way, so he's just capped in terms of the amount of games he can play. But if you're looking at the short term, just how many minutes is realistic for him to play per night, just from the standpoint of he hasn't played an NBA game in quite a bit of time. Especially when we also consider that it was, we were talking about blood clots that kept him out for that period of time too. So I think there's a skill set that the Lakers could benefit from, especially defensively, which they've been lackluster at, to be kind, to start the season. But I just wonder how much can he realistically play, at least from the jump. Get his legs back underneath him, get his wind back underneath him after being out for so long.
I just looked it up, and all three front court players are averaging over 34 minutes a night, and that seems like a bit much. So especially, I mean, 80 now. I think that they're going to have to be careful, regardless of like. I personally think he should probably just sit this Memphis game, and as you said, every game matters in the West. But if there's any chance of him potentially further aggravating this at the expense of making it a longer term injury, I think this is just one of those games that even if you end up losing it, you end up getting blown out. Sucks to end the road trip potentially 1-4, but if it potentially comes at the risk of 80 suffering a more serious injury that costs him multiple games, multiple weeks, like obviously you got to think about the bigger picture there, potentially at the expense of like one game. But if you bring in Koloko, you could see more two big lineups, and whether it's him anchoring the second unit with Jackson Hayes or him playing in some second unit lineups with AD, I think those three guys could all play together in different combinations. And then you kind of slot some guys, so a little bit more of LeBron or Rui at the three. You could slide Dalton and Max down and play just bigger. I mean, Cam obviously, I mentioned Max, but like Cam is probably in that role now. So Cam more at the two or Dalton. So like I just think playing slightly bigger kind of offsets some of the athleticism and physicality disadvantages that we've seen with the Lakers on this road trip. So that to me is like the most appealing thing for him. Like I don't expect him to come in and play a big role yet, because again, you mentioned 18, 19 months off. Like that's a long time, and theoretically probably be more in like an 8 to 12 minute a night role as like the 2.5 string, guy kind of behind Jackson. But if AD misses time, like he might kind of have to play more just because the Lakers literally don't have guys above 6'8" in their rotation. But let's take a step back and look at the road trip overall. So LA is currently 1-3 on this road trip, which means the best they can finish is 2-3, and potentially 1-4. I thought that this was going to be a 3-2 road trip. If not, I actually predicted a 4-1 road trip with the one loss. I thought they'd lose to Phoenix and then they'd win out. Clearly, I was wrong on that. But where have things gone wrong, in your opinion, on this road trip? And I guess what were your expectations entering it, and how have they fallen short, or maybe you were expecting a little bit of a come down after the first three games?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was expecting to come down. I mean, if you asked me beforehand, I don't know if I really thought about it too much in terms of a record prediction, but I thought 3-2 would have been a good road trip, especially consider. Especially when you consider we didn't know at the time maybe, but just how good Cleveland was. Uh, Cleveland's, I think, as they're still undefeated, they've been killing
They've
it
looked
ever
really,
since the
really
season
good.
started. Yeah, they've been really, really good. So it felt like, Phoenix, let's be honest, like that first Phoenix game in LA, like LA kind of stole that. So them losing to Phoenix on the road, that felt like one of those like get back games. But other than that, it felt like obviously the Memphis, Detroit, Toronto games, those felt like, and in Cleveland game, those felt like, those could have been real games. Obviously, Cleveland went the direction it went. Just Cleveland came out, punched in the mouth. Lakers couldn't respond, or didn't respond rather. So 3-2, 2-3 for a 5-game road trip, especially at this time of year. I mean, you're 4 games into the season, you're basically gone. And I feel like we talk about it a little bit, but not enough, about how they were basically on the road for almost the entire preseason. I mean, yes, they were coming back to LA. After Palm Springs, after Milwaukee, I want to say, or maybe Vegas. After
Yeah,
Milwaukee,
because the
after
Milwaukee,
Milwaukee,
there was a gap on both sides of that.
yeah, yeah. So before and after Milwaukee, before Vegas, they were in LA, but they closed the preseason with, I think it was Vegas, San Francisco, and Phoenix. Like that's
Mhm.
3 and 4 nights, and then obviously get the 3 games at home, and then on the road for 5 games. So I'm sure fatigue's a factor. It certainly looked like that at certain points, but I've been, I'm sure we'll get into the details, but the transition defense, the pick and roll defense, some of the offensive lulls, like the first the first 3 games, really first 3 and 1/4 game, including the game against Phoenix, like it felt like they found a rhythm offensively. Like we kind of saw a vision offensively of what it could be. But outside of the Toronto game, like on this road trip, that's considerably dropped, at least to me. Like the turnover, like they've been the Cleveland game was the one game where they had way too many turnovers, just way too loose with the ball, too many giveaways. Other than that, they've actually been they've had good ball security. So it's just been the shot making hasn't been there. I mean, some of the attention to detail hasn't been there. I mean, Detroit, they offensively against Detroit the other night, they seemed like Detroit's physicality was bothering them. They were getting bumped off their spots. The execution at some certain points were just off. So maybe that's also fatigue's playing a factor in that. But I mean, I know a lot of it talks about the transition defense, understandably so. JJ mentioned the pick and roll defense, but even offensively, they've looked off in a way that in LA, they just, especially in the Minnesota game, and even part of the Sacramento game, like they just look so sharp. So those have been things that just, I guess, stood out to me. And obviously, like there are individual players that we can get into. Like AD's been phenomenal. Austin's been good. Like obviously, you mentioned Max Christie. He's been, he has, just has a disappointing start to the season. Like individual players, they've had some moments, but as a whole, that's I guess my bigger picture macro look at just how the trip has gone.
Yeah, no, and you bring up the fatigue, and I know fans don't want to hear that, but I've gotten that sense as well. It just feels like they haven't been playing as hard, and they've sort of had heavier legs. But I would also say, like, to me, the two biggest issues with this team right now are its defense overall, particularly the transition defense, but even the half court defense, like they really shored that up in the second half, that as in their transition defense, second half of the Pistons loss. But even in the half court, they were just getting blown by simple dribble penetration, guys coming off screens, ball screens, and Detroit was just quicker and more athletic than them. And they've been at a speed disadvantage really in the last three games. Like looking at Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell in the Cleveland matchup, looking at RJ Barrett and Grady Dick in the Toronto matchup, and those guys going off in the second half, and looking at the Detroit matchup with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. I mean, Jaden Ivey was like just getting to the rim at will. No one could stay in front of him other than Cam Reddish, who came in and really provided a spark. So I would say like the defense has been really concerning, and Krangis, shout out to Krangis. He's been on the show now a couple times. He tweeted that the Lakers right now, according to his metrics, they're sixth in defense off of makes and fourth worst off of misses, fourth worst off of turnovers. But basically it's been like when the Lakers make shots and when they're scoring and they're able to set their defense and get back, they've been good defensively. And when they've had turnovers or misses and teams have been able to run out on them or get into early offense on them, that's when those teams have been able to score at a very high rate. And when it becomes like transition in part is a athletic battle, right? Like it's one thing. Like one thing that really stood out in the first three games for me was when LA was able to set their defense in the half court setting, they were able to really shade with their shifts and really key in on Anthony Edwards or Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, De'Aaron Fox, and the help was there. The rotations were sound, and when they're able to load that backside and zone it up or just be in tune with a player attacking someone one-on-one, even if that player has an advantage, be it speed or athleticism or whatever, they were able to rotate and help. But when it's in the chaos of transition and it's really just like guys, you have cross matches or it is an actual like speed contest, the Lakers are almost always going to lose that. And they just have too many guys who are going to lose a track meet to opposing guards. And it's really been like, if you can run on the Lakers, if you're quicker than them, if you're bigger than them, if you're more physical than them, like just run on them, and you're probably going to get high percentage looks, including them starting to over rotate to the paint, and then that leads to kick out wide open shots, in the corners or the wings or whatever. So I think that the defense has been to me the biggest concern, and I was already sort of like, this to me is probably like the number 15 to 20th best defense in the league, but so far through the first 7 games, they're 25th, and that feels about right. Like it's looked pretty bad. They've looked like a lottery level defense. And if you look at the teams around them, it's all like lottery teams. And then the other thing has just been the bench. The bench has been awful overall. Gabe Vincent, Max Christie have been non-factors offensively. I don't think they've been quite at the level that they've needed defensively. Dalton Connect has looked like a rookie at times. Now, we've seen the flashes, but we haven't seen that consistency. And part of that, I think, is the organized offense and making sure they're involving him, but also him being assertive and aggressive. Jackson Hayes, I think, has been a bit up and down. Teams target him defensively and just score on him or draw fouls at the rim. And then Cam Reddish provided a spark in the Detroit game. Granted, it was Detroit. We'll see if he can do that against a Memphis. We'll see if he could do that against the Philly or some of the tougher teams coming up. But so far, like, that was one of the best bench performances of the season, which he didn't even score or take a shot. And like, that's saying how low the bar has been to be an effective bench player for the Lakers this season. So between the defense and the bench, like which one?
I'm saying 5. I'm holding you accountable from your last, I think one of your previous shows. 5 rebounds. He got the 5 rebounds.
Cam did. So I did shout that out on my post-game reaction last night, that Cam got the 5 rebounds that I said he would not get, that Max Christie got the previous game. And look, yeah, I mean, look, I was wrong. I said it last night. I was wrong on Cam. He had a really good game. I would say a better game than Max has had at any point this season. And I think JJ Redick said he earned his trust, and he's probably going to be in the rotation at least for the Memphis game. So if he keeps that up, like, I think his role is only going to expand. But between the bench and the defense, I know you mentioned the transition defense and some of the numbers, but which one to you has been a bigger concern up to this point?
Actually, it's funny you asked, because I actually just wrote about this maybe a few hours ago, right around the time that I landed. It's the transition defense, honestly. Kind of to Crandis' point, I put this in my story. So the Lakers right now, they're allowing 28.4 points in transition per game, which is 29th, and 1.21 points per possession in transition, which is tied for 27th. And I think what needs to, obviously, you have the raw number, then you have like the per possession number. What needs to be help understood is just like transition is such a significant part of defense. Like, sometimes we think, like, I think some people don't understand, like, right. So for instance, 21% of opponents' offensive possessions end in transition against the Lakers. That's over a fifth of their offense. And they're just, I mean, like you said, to your point, like, if you can run the Lakers, they're just run, and you're going to wind up getting, I mean, basically the same efficiency as you would like a corner, like better than a corner 3. Like, that's how, I mean, 1.2 points just from just running on them. That's how dire the situation has been for the Lakers. So to me, that's the main concern. Now, obviously, this has been a concern for multiple seasons. This isn't a new issue. But it feels like teams are from the jump have just exploited this even more. You know, there are times where guys weren't getting back. You know, they were caught in limbo, and then even when guys, you know, as the Lakers like to say, using their limbo rate. But even when guys are in position, I think kind of to what you're saying, they're still blow-bys. You know, guys will be in the spot, and next thing you know, they're dribbled around, you know, someone drives around them, someone cuts into space, and next thing you know, it's an easy layup, or they're overhelping, or they get caught out of position. So to me, I mean, they're just the sheer volume of points they're allowing in those situations. That's the most concerning to me. The bench, I'm not as concerned about, just because there are certain. I mean, I feel like Gabe Vincent's his shot's going to start falling at some point. You know, if Max stays in the role, I can see.
It should, but it's yet to fall as a Laker. It's yet to that. Well, I mean, so granted, he's played like less than 20, or I guess including playoffs, games. It's been like, but
22.
Well, including playoffs, so what? That's 23.
Yeah, 23, not counting preseason games between regular season and playoffs. But
what? I guess there was the play-in game too, so 24. But yeah, I mean, he's not, off the top of my head, he's maybe had like two impactful shooting performances that I can
So
remember.
yeah, but I mean, he's not. I mean, his before he came to Lakers, he wasn't a dead eye shooter. But for him to shoot 11% from three on
Yeah,
last season,
he's
and
gonna be
now
better than that.
18. Yeah, like there is, and some of it's also just how he gets set up. He's not getting set up the most in terms of his own shots right now. Like it feels like a lot of his stuff is coming off of him having to create for himself rather than the beneficiary of playmaking from others. So it feels like he should be able to get his shots to fall. Maybe, possibly, we'll see. Same with Max
We'll see.
Christie. I mean, at least with Max Christie, there is, granted, it's not the biggest sample just because he wasn't a consistent part of rotation his first two seasons, but we have proof of him being a strong shooter. So, and I think some of his
I mean,
some of his issues
40% catch and
is
shoot the last 2 years, or his first two
exactly. I think
years.
some of his struggles have been just decision making. Figuring out
Mm-hmm.
when to catch and shoot, when to drive, or when to attack a closeout and drive into the paint. I think some of that's coachable. I think some of that's part of what happens when his minutes are so up and down. He wasn't able to. He needs reps, and the thing is that now he's getting those reps, but they need him to be better than what he is now. But he's going to have to get the reps to just grow and figure it out. Whether through film and actual on court time. So at least from the bench standpoint, with those two guys specifically, and then it seems like Cam could have a bigger role. We'll see how that looks. Obviously he had a bigger role last season, even starting for, I think, 26 games at one point. But we'll see, how many minutes he gets. I think he played 14 the other night. Does that get bumped up to 16, 18, maybe going to around the 20 threshold? Because defensively, he can, we saw it yesterday. He was a game changer. Like his energy, his ability to just stay in front of guys, like that's one of the biggest issues, at least to me, with the Lakers defensively. They just struggle to stay in front of guys, and then you get into the overhelping, guys having to make rotations. At least with Cam, you feel like you can put him on an island, and he moves his feet extremely well. He glides, he's athletic, he's quick, he mirrors really well, and that's how he gets a lot of his steals. Just figuring out, all right, you're going to throw this pass here, I got it. We saw him getting to a force the jump ball with Kate Cunningham yesterday. Just figuring out, all right, I see ball. This is my opportunity. Go after it. So that's something that they've lacked. Even with Gabe and Max having solid to good defensive seasons, just Cam, I think to me, I mean, one, he's just bigger than both those guys. He's a little bit more athletic. So there's just a little bit more. He's a little bit more dynamic defensively, and obviously he's bigger than them both in terms of just height and weight. So I think the bench, there are certain things that will get ironed out as guys find a rhythm or the rotation gets tweaked even more. But the transition defense, I mean, I think I'm just more concerned about that because this has been a concern the previous couple of seasons, and it's getting difficult to see a scenario or ways in which this can be. I'm not saying they have to be like top 10, top 12 in transition defense, but at least be credible. And right now, they're not even credible.
Well, and we were talking about it last night at the game where they've been bottom 4 in 4 of the 5 seasons of LeBron and AD together. And I think at some point, like that's just kind of the DNA of those guys. And if we're critiquing those two, because I think sometimes a lot of the blame goes everywhere else. And for as great as Anthony Davis has been, and for as good to great as LeBron has been for stretches, neither one of those guys is particularly has a high motor in terms of transition defense and going from one side of the floor to the other. Like with LeBron, we'll of course see the highlight chase down block, and he still remains like I think about Sam Merrill in Cleveland had a transition layup opportunity. He heard the footsteps, looked back, saw LeBron, and made a business decision and dribbled the ball out. And was like, I'm not about to be pinned on the backboard. So like he still carries that threat and that reputation, but both of those guys can sometimes trot back, and that puts a lot of pressure on the other 3 guys. And if it's, I think Ruiz is tried to get back, although he's often corner crashing now, but with the Lakers' new scheme. And then if it's Austin and D'Lo, or even Gabe and Max as sort of your last line of defense, or even your initial line of defense, like those guys are going to lose to the Donovan Mitchells, the RJ Barretts, the Jaden Ivies. Like they're just not. They don't have the physicality, the athleticism, the speed, the quickness to keep those guys in front of them in the open court, let alone sometimes even in the half court. So that's where I think. I think I'm with you. I will say I'm probably a little bit lower on the bench than you now, just because to go like Gabe has struggled his entire tenure as a Laker in terms of his shooting, and I do expect it to regress positively. Max now seems to potentially be out of the rotation. I will say with Cam, the one thing I've been really impressed with as well has been he's become a much lower usage offensive player, and it's a small sample. It's really been like a game and a garbage time shift, but he's only taken one shot in I want to say I think it's been like 23 minutes or something like that. So the fact that it feels like he's really embraced like I'm going to be the dirty work point of attack guy, and I'm not going to try because and he did that at times last season, but then there would be the occasional lapses where he would try and break a guy down off the dribble, or just do too much offensively, dribble the ball off of his foot, try and force a pass that gets stolen. So like he's a guy who can bring chaos on both sides of the ball. And defensively, it's often good chaos, but offensively, it can be bad chaos. And so far, I feel like he's played within a bit more structure and a bit of a more realistic offensive role for his skill set and what he's shown at the NBA level. So I think that's been a positive. Dalton's the guy the Lakers could probably lean into more, try to get him going. And then Jackson, I think, is fine in certain matchups. But like last night in Detroit, he could barely play 2 minutes in the fourth quarter before they had to pull him as Detroit was starting to re-extend the lead, and then had to bring in AD at like the 10-minute mark or just before that to try and make a comeback. So like with Jackson, I think he's very much matchup based, and that's where Christian coming back or even Vando coming back and maybe them playing smaller second units, but like maybe these switchable groups with like a LeBron, Rui, Vando front court or something kind of funky like that. That could be a little interesting. But I guess with the bench, they've been so bad, and it's been, to your point, like they haven't really figured out how to use these guys. That I wonder. Like, I don't know. I think it can only go up, right? It probably can't get much worse, but they are 30th right now in bench scoring. I just think at some point, like you need some level of offense from your bench, and Vando coming back will help the defense, but that's not necessarily going to help the offense. Christian Wood could potentially help the offense, but he also did not shoot the ball well last year for the most part. So like transition, it's that can be kind of, you can work on that in terms of game plan and film, and like really, okay, maybe we're not going to corner crash anymore. We're going to play a little bit more of a conservative brand of transition defense because we're just getting hammered here. Like there are certain adjustments you can make to try and stop the bleeding. You can't really force those guys to make shots. And up to this point, that's been a big concern. And then I also think they just haven't really, like JJ said, he wants those guys to be banshees. They've not been banshees. Like Cam was a banshee. Cam came in and was a banshee. But Gabe and Max have had solid defensive moments, but they haven't been like game-changing defensive bench guys. And that's where, like a lot of times, it's crazy. The Lakers have a negative net rating, and with their starters, they're a plus 4.7 points per 100 possession. So just think about basically any time a bench player comes in, those lineups tend to be negative. I think it'll get better, but I'm also like, what if it doesn't? Your margin for error is so slim.
I hear you, and I think this is the one. I should have said this too. The one of the reasons I'm like the bench. I'm not gonna act like the bench is a concern because it is. I think another reason is not as much, and you kind of touched on this, is because of Christian and Vando. In theory, they should be coming back, relatively soon. I use the word relatively because I think Christian's going to get reevaluated sometime within this next week. Vando, we've seen him in after practices, or shoot arounds, getting set shooting a little bit more. So that seems to be a progression with his own return to play progress. So the other thing is that if you're using a 9-10 rotation, like let's just say that Dalton's going to stay in there for sure, and then other than like if Christian and Vando, if they're good to go, like that could be, Dalton, Christian, Vando, that could be 8 right there. Like if Max isn't performing at the level he needs to, or if Gabe's not performing at the level he needs to, or Jackson's not performing, that was something that we talked about before we knew the extent of Christian and Vando's injuries, just who's going to be in the rotation. At a certain point, if guys aren't performing, then that like those guys may be the ones who aren't in the rotation. And then obviously like there just brings different dynamics. Like Vando could help the trend. Like if you have Vando and Cam in the rotation, coming off the bench, together, not literally together at the same time, but stagger them off the bench, they could help the defense, and that alone could make a significant difference just on the transition defense. So they may not be doing it in terms of scoring, but maybe you go from what did I say the Lakers were? They're allowing the 29th the most transition points.
29th, yeah.
Yeah, maybe they go from 29th to 18th or 20th, which is still not good, but at least you're not close to the worst. So maybe that's also where I'm coming from. Like if in theory there are other bench guys who could be helping, and Christian, I mean, we talked to him media day, and he basically said like, yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but he said like last year, the staff asked me to do like this defensive stuff, rebounding. I'm basically going to get back to getting buckets. That's how I took what he said. That's not what he said, but that's how I took what he said. So I was like, all right, well, I mean, if that's what is going to happen,
Right.
or if that's what that's
The problem is they also they need him to rebound and play defense too, though. That's the
yeah,
thing.
they do. That's true. But at least with those two, you're getting bigger. And same with Cam in the rotation. Like you're getting bigger, you're getting more size, a little bit more defensive oriented. Where I mean, just like my inclination is, I just think this team needs to lean more into defense because of their top 2 guys, and honestly, 3 of their top 4 or 4 of their top 5, pretty much the starting lineup. I mean, most of them lean more offensively than defensively. So I feel like I understand why JJ say we're not really concerned about the offense because we have it with our starters. Like if you need to be benchies, like you need benchies to an extent. And right now, I get what he's saying, and I think the bench could become that if once those guys get back, and if the current guys in the rotation aren't living up to that right now. So that's also why like I'm thinking like if this rotation doesn't work, or if this bench doesn't work, there will be help at some point down the line.
That's fair. We still don't know when exactly
Yeah.
that help will come, and based on the way the last couple of years have gone in terms of injury updates and stuff, I think there's reason to be a little skeptical in terms of timetables. But look, Christian Koloko is potentially playing on Wednesday against Memphis, so maybe there's some cause for optimism there. But with Vando and Wood, last one here before we wrap is in terms of solutions, right? Because I've seen it in the comments on here, on Twitter, on my stories on The Athletic. It's bench D'Lo, bench Gabe, bench Max, bench Jackson.
There's only so many guys you can bench.
Well, there's only so many guys you can bench, which also highlights my concern. Like, okay, so if you bench Gabe and Max, who's playing? Like, are you calling up JHS, or you played Broad? Like, they're out of options. But in terms of like a potential rotation adjustment, whether it is now Cam being ahead of Max and potentially even Gabe in the rotation, whether it's inserting someone into the starting lineup and changing the starting lineup, because that's been something that I've started to trend toward. Is I think they probably need to change the starting lineup, specifically the D'Lo Austin backcourt, and I've been advocating for either Gabe or Dalton to start in place of D'Lo. Obviously, with Dalton, you're not getting a defensive upgrade necessarily, but you are getting, I think, a better, a more natural off-ball fit because right now there's just so many mouths to feed with the starting group that it feels like D'Lo has kind of been marginalized at times, and that's partly why JJ changed the rotation so he could get more second unit shifts with AD and bring the ball up and be more involved. But like another way to do that is to bring him off the bench. And and it's not to say that Gabe or Dalton is better than D'Lo, because they are not better than D'Lo, and I'm not saying that. But in terms of maximizing like lineups and the rotation, it's all about fit and how pieces complement each other. And there's just such an overlap with Austin and D'Lo at times, and the Lakers are at such a physical and athletic and speed disadvantage that either replacing D'Lo with Gabe, who's a better defender, for all his flaws and for how bad he's been at certain things, he's a better defender than D'Lo. Or going with Dalton, and you're going a little bigger. He's more athletic than D'Lo, and I think offensively he can just be that spacer, off-ball guy who's drawing the defense away from the paint, depending on how you're using him. And then defensively, I think they've probably been close to the same level. Like Dalton's got some physical advantages over D'Lo, though he is a rookie. So at least you're going a little bit bigger. Like he's a good, a couple inches bigger than D'Lo. So between that's probably on the drastic side in terms of changing the starting group, to maybe going to Vando once he comes back. Like there's several ways that this could all play out, but in terms of like an actual like rotation adjustment or change, where are you at in terms of like, are you changing the starting lineup? Are you changing more of the bench units? Are you changing nothing and just hoping that guys can, through film and maybe tactical adjustments, kind of play better within the current lineups? Like how do you see all of those moving pieces?
Before I even answer that, I just want to acknowledge just like the irony in all of this. Because last year we were like the starting lineup. No, the starting lineup hadn't changed yet. I think we're game 9. I want to say, or maybe game 8. I think there were 3 and 5, and then the starting lineup was changed in game 9.
Yeah.
And at the time it was like, what's going on? And now we're in the game 8. We're about to be in game 8, and now like everybody's like, we need to change the starting lineup. Which
I would say there's 2 things to that though, because one, I always thought Rui should have been starting over Torian, so I thought that was going to be an adjustment potentially at that time. Obviously, newsflash, that was not the adjustment, and he started another 40-something games. And then also, I thought, once it kind of became clear, okay, they're looking more defensive, I thought they were going to bench D'Lo and start Austin, the guy that they just invested in, just called a future All-Star, just played on Team USA, and not the other guy that they were trying to trade, but they went that route, and the rest is history. So I think they had a little bit more optionality at that point, and also I think there was like a couple of guys you could really point to. Like really, these have been their 5 best players, and benching D'Lo, it's not even necessarily an indictment of D'Lo. I think it's just he's been more of the 5th option with the starting group, and he's the guy that teams pick on defensively. At the same time, the bench has been so bad, it's kind of like starting Gabe is that almost. Is that such a downgrade that it almost offsets any defensive improvement?
No, I understand. Like I said, I'm not even saying about you. I'm just because I see the comments too. I probably see a lot more than I speak on. I just find it funny but I mean, obviously in the context it's different. Like last year, I mean, I guess the similar in terms of Vando being out to start the season, but they had Torian starting versus now they're starting Rui, but there are just different flows and ups and downs to whatever decision is made. Right, at least personally, right now, I will say I'm not gonna say too surprised, but it has been a little surprising to me because we've already seen some rotation changes, like a few, like here and there. And some of them, like some JJ's done, then he's gone back to something, like for instance, like Dalton has started to come in the first and third quarters. Well, not against Detroit. Because you said he didn't play in the second half, but he's been coming in earlier in the rotation, and before he was only coming in and to start the second and fourth. At one point, and when Rui didn't start the fourth quarter last night. He came in a couple minutes into the quarter, but it used to be, we've seen kind of different iterations of that start of second and start of fourth quarter lineup. Which I think at one point it was Jackson, LeBron, Rui, D'Lo, and Dalton, and now we've seen that switch up to where it's been Austin, Dalton, Rui, LeBron, Jackson. We've seen, like I said, Rui not started, so we've seen some adjustments made to the rotation. Right now, I'm kind of at a standpoint where I kind of want them to just. I mean, obviously, this is barring health with AD, and obviously you get Chris Koloko in, Cam Reddish over Max Christie in the rotation. We'll see. I kind of want to see them play a consistent rotation just for maybe like 4 or 5 games. Because I think sometimes what happens, and I'm not there with the starting lineup change. I understand the argument of change the starting lineup. You get better two-way balance in the backcourt. I do agree that I think if you're going to change it, that the best pairings are D'Lo and Max, and then Gabe and Austin, just in terms of the backcourt. And if you're, as it would be understandable if the Lakers are committed to keeping Austin a starter, especially after what happened last season. So naturally, that puts D'Lo on the bench. I'm not there yet in terms of saying, Gabe starting over D'Lo, but I would say give it a few games. At least give it a few more games to see, like, if we're only on we're about to be in game 8. Can you figure out just a little bit more? I mean, we saw it against. I mean, granted, it was Toronto, but against Toronto, there was a little bit more balance between, that was in the rotation change when D'Lo played, almost the entire first quarter alongside AD, and Austin was the first guard out. In addition to LeBron obviously being the first starter out, and then LeBron and Austin were in the second unit to start the second and fourth quarters, and there was just a little bit more synergy, which is kind of how it went at mostly last year. So I kind of just want to see it a little bit more. Not if things aren't working, if things don't turn around, then you have to you make a business decision. But I kind of want to get to maybe like at least game 11, 12, 13. I mean, I looked at the schedule before we got back. I forget where that is. I know they have tomorrow's game 8, right? Tomorrow's game 8. They played 3 games at home, and then they played the back-to-back on the road in San Antonio, New Orleans. So
it might be that San Antonio game, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe at that San Antonio game, like because they also have a gap. They play Wednesday, Friday, and then I think they play again Sunday, and then Wednesday,
Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, so there's that gap in between that the second and third home game of that trip. Like that's something that's when I would start thinking about, all right, do we need to change anything? Because if you change something immediately, like right now, like, yeah, they can get practice time, but I would want to give it time as well. My thing is give it a little bit more time. Let me see this rotation. I like the changes that have been made so far. I just want to see them play out just a little bit longer. I like the idea of Austin, LeBron being the pairing, and D'Lo and AD being the pairing. I like bringing Dalton a little bit more. I like the idea of Austin, Dalton, LeBron, Rui, and Jackson, or if it's Christian Koloko, maybe starting the second and fourth quarters. Like I like splitting up D'Lo and Austin, so they're obviously they're starting alongside one another, but they're at least kind of similar to how AD and LeBron, one of them are always on the floor, one of Austin and D'Lo are always on the floor. Because earlier in the season, we were seeing quite a few minutes of it being Gabe and Max in the backcourt. And then
which was a disaster.
I'm good on seeing that again. I'm good, and I'm glad. But again, that's also been a recent change. Like it feels like I'm not super surprised. Because coaches, they see what they see. Not just in games but in practices. I'm a little bit surprised. Like if we think about it is nothing big. Like people just think of like, oh, starting lineup, that's a big change. It's been a bunch of micro changes. Nothing like drastic, just a bunch of micro changes. And I just want to see, can we get 5, 7 games of just, obviously injuries aside, this is the rotation. Guys know when they're coming in. Like again, injuries, foul trouble aside, because even the original second unit, right, when D'Lo and LeBron were leading that second unit, they were killing it. And then I think they had maybe like one bad game where they weren't. And the next thing you know, I think after that, or maybe 2 games later, Austin's getting that shift now. So it's also one of those I think it should have gone that direction anyway. But I kind of just want to see, get a little bit more data, get a little bit more feel with that, with some of the rotation right now before I make any more, I guess, more significant or more drastic changes. That's just where I'm at right now. Like I said, I'm not opposed to them. Just I want to give it maybe at least another week before I start making significant ones. I'm also very open-minded to Vando becoming a starter once he returns, but I would want to see how he feels because like the thing about Vando is he's missed a lot of basketball over the past. Over the past year. He played 29 games.
He hasn't played in 9 months.
Yeah, hasn't played in 9 months.
It's been over 9 months now. Yeah.
So I'm open to him, bring back the original starting lineup, or if you want to have, I guess in theory, Gabe, Austin, Vando, LeBron, AD.
Let me throw this at you. What about Rui, Vando, and Austin.
Oh, I see. Okay, I get what you're
It's
saying.
funky, but it's
Austin,
big.
Vando, Rui,
And
LeBron, AD. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, so I'm hearing you. At the same time, then your bench is so small. Or in theory, right? In theory, depending
yeah,
on what direction you go, because then you have Gabe, Max, or Cam, D'Lo, Dalton,
I think in
and
this case you probably are phasing Gabe. It's probably like D'Lo, Cam, Dalton, and one of the centers. That's like my 9-man rotation there.
okay, so yeah, and then at that point you're phasing, yeah, your
I
most
mean,
significant free agent signing from a year. I hadn't thought about
look,
that.
man.
I mean, you actually, I've thought of, let me not lie. I thought about that, but I
I
thought it was
also
so
I
out
also
there.
just advocated for him to both start and be out of the rotation. That shows you where the bench is at right now.
Oh my gosh, yes, this is where we're
It
at
could,
right
like
now.
I'm open because so to your point, it feels like JJ's been trying to, and I know you got to get out of here in a second, so we'll wrap this in
Yeah,
two.
we're
But
good. We're good.
it feels like to your point, like JJ's been doing these micro changes to avoid the macro change of the starting lineup. We know the context of the Lakers have been reluctant to bench D'Lo in the past because they've been afraid that they would potentially lose him if they do move him to the bench. Now, though, I will say if you look at how this has been going, the Cleveland game. Technically, I think Max had entered for LeBron for part of that run, as he does midway through the first quarter. But I want to say D'Lo and Austin were that the backcourt at least for a good chunk of that run in the first quarter, and then going to the Toronto game, they obviously started together in the second half when Toronto went on that run in the third quarter, and then same thing in the Detroit game to start the game. So I think the bench has obviously not been great as we've laid out throughout this show today. But I also more recently, it feels like the starters have been giving up these runs, or like maybe one bench player is in with like 4 starters, and it's often still the D'Lo Austin backcourt that they're trying to hide D'Lo on someone, and then Austin is having to take on a primary perimeter assignment. Like that was one of the nice things when Cam entered the game, was that you could put him on Jaden Ivey, and then all of a sudden Austin didn't have to be that primary point of attack guy. It could be a guy like Cam. So I guess I'm with you. Like I think I'm not at the point to change the starting lineup. Like I haven't swung that way entirely, but I'm starting to trend that way in terms of just like I don't think they're athletic enough in the backcourt. And it didn't cost them the first few games, even against a tough matchup against the Kings. But as we've now seen them on the road, I think that particular deficiency has really hurt them. It also doesn't help that like Gabe's undersized and he's not athletic either. Max is athletic, but he hasn't necessarily like channeled that in the same way a guy like Cam can. So that's where Cam, really what was impactful. So they're in a tricky spot because, I mean, you could make a case for, as I just said, like Gabe for defensive purposes could start, but he's also played so poorly that like you can make the case he shouldn't even be in the rotation. I mean, and this is a whole other conversation, but like the other thing is you could go trade for someone, and that they're still probably a month and a half away from that at least. But that right now, like an athletic defensive guard, DeAnthony Melton, Alex Caruso type. It's a sore subject for a lot of Laker fans, but that type of player could really help this team.
No, for sure. I mean, that's why I want to give it. I mean, I know it's hard to hear this. I'm the same person who said every game in the regular season matters, especially in the West. I also want to give it more time. I just a little bit before you make like a significant macro in terms of. I mean, look, we're almost there. It feels like with Max, like he is their sixth man in terms of just when he comes in, and now it feels like that could be teetering away. So again, to your point, like we're making some micro changes along the way. We could be on the precipice of a macro change, but I just want to give a little bit more time. I'll just a tad bit, just to see like, can Gabe find some shooting? Like, can he find his shot? Can I mean the D'Lo Austin backcourt, it has its issues, but can they work around that just a little bit more to where maybe maybe I know LeBron's usually been the first sub out, but maybe the first sub is one of the guards. Like maybe Austin's the first guard
That's
out.
one of the things I was thinking as we were discussing
Yeah,
this. I really like that of maybe you extend LeBron's shift and then
but like a
sub
minute
one
or
of
two.
one of those guys out.
Yeah,
Maybe you sub out
maybe,
because you're trying to keep Austin and LeBron together. You sub out Austin first, then you sub out LeBron a minute or two later, and then D'Lo gets the long shift in the first quarter.
that would be. I mean, that would honestly be like so. Tomorrow, for instance, like let's just say that Cam gets the nod over Max in terms of the rotation. You have Cam come in for Austin, so then you have D'Lo, Cam, LeBron, Rui, AD, and then you have Gabe come in for LeBron. So then you have Gabe, D'Lo, Cam, Rui, AD, and then you just go into the normal rotation. Then Jackson in for Rui, Dalton eventually comes, and then you kind of get into the flow and rhythm from there. I mean, that's probably that would be like the most immediate change. That may be the most immediate change I would make. Even that
we just solved it. We just solved the Lakers rotation.
Just like that in like 2 minutes.
That's why they pay us the big bucks.
Something like that, right?
Something like that, yeah. Medium bucks. But Khobi, where can the good people find you if they're not following you already? And also make sure to check out Khobi's work on the Southern California News Group. I am subscribed to the OC Register, and I read all his stuff and get a little bit smarter each time I read one of your stories. So appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on.
Likewise, appreciate having me on. I get smarter reading you too. You said it, just OC Register. You can go to my profile. Obviously, I'm on Twitter. I think I'm Khobi_Price. I've changed it before, so I think that's still it.
KHOBI.
There we go. Yes, thank you. KHOBI_PRICE. But yeah, that's where you can follow me, and gonna have some takeaways from the road trip, but also just this segment of the season later in the week. So be on the lookout for that. That's just going to tease that for right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment under this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Wednesday night after the Lakers-Grizzlies game with hopefully a live stream, as long as my Wi-Fi is working. If not, I will do a post-game just video like I did last game. So be on the lookout for that. I will talk to you soon.